Welcome to Level with Emily Reese. This is music by Steve Pardo for Signs of the Sojourner. Signs of the Sojourner is a narrative deck-building card game about communication, and Steve will talk about that in just a bit. This is easily one of my favorite soundtracks of 2020, hands down, and one I know I'll return to for years to come. I love this soundtrack. It was such a pleasure to talk with Steve about his music, and he starts off talking about the game.
So the game is, I mean, when I first heard about, when they contacted me and I saw the art and sort of read the one pager of the story and the premise, I was like, I have to work on this game. So I tried, most pitch. I mean, of course, I'm enthusiastic about any game, but
sure,
anyone that approaches, I'm excited that, first of all, that they would approach me. But for these guys specifically and what they're trying to do, I was like, I have to work on this. So the game in and of itself, there's two big things to talk about. And there's the story, the mechanic, and the game mechanic. So, and they're kind of intertwined. So the story, it's kind of a coming-of-age story. At the beginning, this isn't a spoiler. You find out that your mom, like, you are the main character, you're, the playable character. You find out that your mom has died relatively recently in the game, which is in and of itself a, kind of somber way to start, but it sets the tone for the rest of the game. So you're in charge of, you end up becoming in charge of her general store in your hometown. And so you're setting out upon the world to collect items to sell in the shop in order to keep the store running. And so you collect those items by, this is sort of like the tagline of the game, is that, you're communicating with others in the world by playing this card game. So the card game is as opposed to other traditional, competitive card games, it's more co-op.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so even it's a single player game, but you're effectively in a co-op game with a computer with the other character, your opponent, because a successful match hints to your opponent that you want to communicate with them. So if a given match is successful, they'll sort of tell you either information about themselves. They'll essentially talk to you.
Okay.
It's like the towns, other towns that you haven't been to yet. Roads that lead to those towns, they unlock missions, et cetera, et cetera. So, as opposed to you defeat them and they lose and they're disqualified, or they, you take loot from them. So, it's definitely a more friendly approach to a card game. So you go around the world, meeting new people, traveling to different towns, playing this game, gathering items, explore, that kind of thing. But the real beauty of this, the hook for me, was at the end of every match, there's this mechanic where whether you win or lose, you have to trade one of your cards in your deck with one of theirs.
Oh.
So you don't have a choice. You have to. Of course, there are some times when they'll have the same card as you. So if you don't want to trade cards, you can just sort of take the one that you already that they have that you already have and just do an even swap. But most of the time, you're getting a new card. Okay. The card game in and of itself is quite simple. You're just matching shapes. But at the beginning of the game, everyone has the same set of cards. So a lot of these conversations are successful because these people. They have the same set of cards. You're winning, and so you're feeling pretty good about the game. And if the game feels kind of easy, but as you travel out farther away from your home, you're introduced to new shapes that you've never seen before, that you don't have in your hand. Yeah. So it's a lot harder to communicate with these people. Huh. But since you're trading cards as you play, regardless of whether you win or lose, you begin to sort of be able to communicate with some of these outsiders with these new cards. So you sort of unlock the ability to communicate successfully with these players, regardless of if you win or lose. So
okay.
So let's say you collect a bunch of these new shapes. This is kind of the hook, and you return home. You've collected all these new shapes. What do you think is going to happen, right?
You can't communicate with your friends at home.
So yeah, exactly. So it's sort of like in a way, like the game mechanic in and of itself is like a poem, you know? Yeah, like I've never experienced anything like this. It's super profound. At least it was for me. And it hits like usually it's like a story beat that hits you or something emotional that happens in the game tonally. But for me, it was like this game mechanic hits you. So I mean, I'm sort of like spoiling for anyone that hasn't played the game. That's sort of like, I mean, the trailer sort of hinted that, so it's not a huge spoiler. And all the reviews say it too, so it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. And then, of course, there's multiple playthroughs, so you can decide, I want to, maintain a lot of my original shapes, or I want to go farther than I have before and know that I'm going to have some failed communication with some of my friends back at home.
Wow.
I haven't experienced any other game that sort of pulls at you like this.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a complicated... obviously I've been talking about it for a while now, so it's a complicated thing to explain to somebody.
Yeah.
But when you're just playing the game, you're just like, oh, it's a cool game with a cool story and a cool card game mechanic. And then this thing just hits you. It's awesome.
That's really cool. So then talk to me about how you decided to write the music you wrote.
I mean, thankfully they had a lot of the artistic and tonal, what they were looking for tonally already sort of established. Like the art style, they were able to share with me near completed environments and characters, along with
oh wow, okay.
Yeah, which is and the game was still like, had another year of production. They just decided this is the most important, the mechanic is cool, but we want the art style and the story to be, kind of in a demonstratable state as soon as possible, so that they can show it to press, build excitement, because that's a big part of the selling. And in my opinion, the big part of the selling point of this game is just how beautiful the art is. And so that was it showed me the concept art and shared with me some of the backstory of these characters and the locations. And Diala, the lead designer, shared with me. I asked her, of course, like, hey, send me some of your favorite music or stuff that you've listening to as you're developing the game.
Neat.
And so she shared with me this awesome Spotify playlist, and sure enough, it's like some of my favorite music.
Cool.
Like Andrew Bird and Sufjan and a bunch of African music, and it was just like, okay, we're on the same page. This is great. So the music is all town music, right?
Okay.
Because that's the majority of the game, is that you're hopping between different towns. So I didn't want it to feel too out there. The art style can feel out there at times, and it definitely is a stylized, hand drawn kind of tone. But I didn't want the music to feel too alien. Even though it's, whether or not this is Earth isn't something they determine in the story, but like, I didn't want it to feel too Mars. I wanted it to feel like Earth in a way, just like like Middle Earth is Earth, right? So it uses a lot of folk instruments. It borrows from genres that are mostly acoustic genres and folk genres. I'm a jazz musician. I always have been. So there's some jazz feeling sounds in there. I'm a fan of indie rock. One of their primary references was African folk music. So there's a few bands, namely Umu Sangare. The genre that she does is called Wasalu. So she's from Mali, and it's a really interesting subgenre, but she owns it. Yeah, she totally like took over. She kind of became pretty famous, but the music is very female vocal based, lots of call and response, but it has folk instruments that we use here in America, like fiddle and percussion, and modern more modern takes on it, or like have electric bass and electric guitar, but it's rooted in this African folk call and response music. And she's just, her vocal performance on like literally everything is like heavenly. It's incredible. Like, she is a goddess. She's incredible. So there was about 10 years ago an album by Bela Fleck called "Throw Your Heart Down." It was actually was actually a documentary first, and then yeah. So me and my wife, this is right around when it came out. Like,
Bela Fleck is a banjoist, just so in case someone doesn't know. Sorry.
Yeah, as known via Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. And now I live in Nashville, so I know some of these guys now, which is pretty cool. Little name drop. But like, the banjo in and of itself is derived from Africa. It was brought over by the slaves, hundreds of years ago, and sort of evolved into what we now know as the banjo. So that's a big part of most of the soundtrack. But then I can't not be myself. So it has jazz in it. It's got it's influenced by, bands chamber groups not unlike Y Music and Eighth Blackbird. Sufjan Stevens was a big influence on a lot of these tracks. So it kind of like definitely crosses a lot of boundaries stylistically and genre-wise. It uses a bit of synthesis, but it's mostly acoustic instruments. Yeah, like the game where you're traveling a lot of locations. I wanted to have as much color that I could throw into folk music that I either myself could play or I knew someone that could play it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you did play tons of the instruments.
That was one of those things that I. Early on, I just decided I didn't want to use samples. Yeah. On it, so there's no samples. It's all either performed by myself or performed by some of my incredibly talented friends. Yeah.
One of the things I really like about it is that it challenges the whole notion of. And there's so many good examples of this in music history in general, but we're always taught major music sounds happy and minor music sounds sad. And this challenges all of that to me, because many of these tunes are in a minor mode, if not all of them. I would have to give a solid listen through for sure, but it's not sad music. It's not even, there's nothing down about it. There's motion in it and just... you know what I mean? There's this freedom and joy in it, even though it's in this minor mode. And I love how it challenges that notion. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Great analysis, Emily. That's incredible that you picked that up. Every song is in, or at least rooted in, E flat minor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that's something we do every once in a while, where we'll just pick a key and try to write every song into it, because that helps sound designers. And SKU Sound this was a SKU Sound project. So SKU Sound is a team of myself and Chris Wilson. We're the composers, and there's two sound designers. So we work. In this case, it was just myself doing music and Nick Coleman on sound. Okay. And so early on, we just decided, okay, we're going to do everything E flat minor. So that freed him to, make sounds that are in that key or derived from that key. So every sound in the game that has a tonal quality to it is tries to surround E flat minor, and
cool.
I'm a huge fan of D flat major and all of its respective modes. So it's just like warm and it's just like a cushion. I don't know if you feel that way. But
well, do you have something against C sharp, or is it just got to be D flat?
I'm Emily, you're embarrassing yourself.
I know. I'm kidding. I've always been a flat key kind of gal myself, but
yeah.
That's awesome.
No, I like E. I have nothing against E major. It's fine. There's also something. So, I tend to soundtracks like this. I tend to I start with guitar. So there's something really, kind of freeing about, or just like changing things up where I tune down every string a half step, because it feels like it's a new instrument in a way. So it can inspire. Some of the tracks have just wild tunings because it's the only way I could play something. In fact, I haven't said this yet, but we did play some of these tracks live.
I wondered about, because you can tell it's not quantized to the beat like digitally. Sorry. I'm sorry. That's true. But no, what I meant was we performed it live like as a concert. Like I see.
We played it like in front of an audience, like
neat.
And we had more gigs lined up, but then COVID happened, and then
Man.
No, it's okay. We'll pick it back up whenever things go back to normal.
Sure.
But anyway, let me go back to your original.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge when we decided E flat minor, and there was some locations that had a more friendly, like, not a lot of conflict in its backstory, or something that was a little bit more warm and supposed to make you feel good. Like there's one town, Bucamburo, which has this really friendly character named Mathilde, and she is super quirky and is kind of crunchy and reads tea leaves. She's like a fortune teller, but she does like meditation. But she's smiley and friendly, and she's like the warmest kind of personality one of the warmest that you'd meet in the game. And I didn't want to write that song in minor. So instead of E flat minor, I sort of rooted it in A flat 7.
Nice.
But then I brought it back to E flat minor in like the bridge and other areas. But like it sort of was, breaking some of the rules. But of course, like modal music, right? It's there's barely any chords in the soundtrack that are outside of D flat major, E flat minor. Sorry for all the theory nerds out there. You're hearing me. A flat 7 was a reasonable concession. D flat major felt a little too happy, but like, something with a dominant 7 bluesy kind of feel felt right. So it's a little more quirky, a little more, kind of like a groove, a funky groove for that one, which, so again, like the entire game is sort of this melancholy feeling because you learn early on that your mother has passed.
Right.
So I didn't want to let go of that at any point.
Yeah.
So it always kind of comes back to that E flat minor, but depending on the circumstance, it's like how much I would play that up. I think it's Romina. That's essentially a major key song. It's very warm and major. Most of them kind of like always go back to E flat minor because there's either something troubling in the world in and of itself, like there's a drought or there's floods, or it's just something reminds you of your mother and how she's passed. So,
See, okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you started with guitar, and one of the textures that I love that is a fairly common thread through this soundtrack is kind of plucked sounds, or how you're deadening your guitar strings while you're playing. Talk to me about that, because I loved that element to this music.
Yeah, I think. So I'm using a lot of different instruments to sort of achieve that.
Yeah, definitely.
Because one of the things I didn't want. And this is, every game composer will say this. They don't want people to turn off the audio.
Right.
And put their own soundtrack on in its stead, or turn it off. And we do have that setting in the options that you can turn down the music all the way to 0. And no composer wants their players to do that. So this game, even though it's very calm and it's slower paced, and you're reading a lot, I didn't want the music to be static or kind of this, kind of every song is slow or moody.
Yeah,
some are
or something. Yeah.
But I wanted to have something rhythmically driving that was not drums.
Right.
There are some tracks that have drums. And I didn't want to have like spiccato strings or something. This is not like epic orc time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not that game. But so the muted acoustic guitar, muted banjo, muted mandolin kind of sounds. I have a charango.
Nice.
There's I do a lot of pizzicato, muted pizzicato violin. That sort of achieves a similar sound to a guitar or a mandolin in a way. I'm using those in place of kind of like a percussion instrument or a drum to achieve that motion. Usually you're in a town that has a heartbeat, and yeah, you know what I mean? Not literally a heartbeat.
A rhythm to it, or
yeah, like there's people walking the streets, or there's shops that are open. It's during the daytime.
Yeah.
So yeah, that those rhythm section instruments are sort of that propulsion, sort of serving as that ostinato groove. That's so that you're kind of always feeling on your toes a little bit. I just didn't want to use the same instrument for every again, it kind of goes back to every location has its own unique flavor.
Yeah.
So depending on sort of the whether or not you're closer to home or farther away, those instruments will shift. So the farther away you go, I might use a more alien sounding instrument. I have this charango mandolin hybrid thing that it actually sounds pretty awful, but you just detune it and put some reverb on it and it sounds amazing, right? Like anything. So that you hear that instrument much more as you venture farther out, and it's not for any, again, like we're not hinting at anything ethnically, and I definitely don't want to make the listeners feel like, because that's a criticism people have against the likes of even John Williams. He gets called out on that for using like, I don't know, Middle Eastern instruments if they're like in a desert or something. It's like that's not cool, So, I mean, I understand like you have to. I have all the compassion in the world for John Williams in that case, because it's, you're trying to signal that you're in a world outside of the norm, and because most of the audience is Western, there's a whole article on that, and I'm not sure I even agree with it, but it's fascinating.
soundtrack, first of all, you can find it on, Bandcamp, iTunes, Spotify, all the places. And on Bandcamp, which is one of the reasons I love Bandcamp, is because if you choose, you can put notes in and you can list credits. So you list all of the wonderful people who performed. I love that Jeremiah played. That's fantastic. Jeremiah Varkas on the cello.
Friend of the show, yeah.
From friend of the show from Videri String Quartet. But also, I bring it up because you didn't list all of the things that you played. You just say, I played everything except what these people play. And so I want to hear more about what you did play. I'm pretty sure you played some trumpet in there at one point.
Yeah, this is why I didn't want to list those things.
Because it's so long, I'm sure, but you got
Well, no, what I mean is I didn't want to reveal that it was me playing the trumpet, but I digress. So, yes, I do play I can hold a trumpet and blow notes through it. So, Melodyne is my friend in that case. I will not hide the fact that I did some tricks to make stuff sound in tune. At least with the trumpet I did. But there's a lot of... I love playing a bass clarinet. I'm a saxophone player primarily. So there's a lot of, tenor, alto, and then bass clarinet, regular clarinet, regular old B-flat clarinet makes its appearance a few times. I love the sound of the clarinet.
Oh, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, so, I'm a huge fan of, there's this band from a while back, Jaga Jazzist. They do like electronic music in the style of Tortoise or, let's see, I don't even know, like Bjork. But very, very experimental and interesting. And they use bass clarinet all over the place. Hanne Hukkelberg is a Norwegian singer-songwriter who's still making great music, who used bass clarinet on some of my favorite tracks a while back. So even from like an early age, I was always like, I love freaking bass clarinet.
It's so good.
Yeah, so it doesn't make nearly as much of an appearance on this soundtrack as I'd like, because if I had a choice, I'd play it on everything. Most of the guitar I'm playing, except for there's a few tracks in there where the incredibly talented Mike Baguetta came into the studio and he just laid down as much material as he was willing to give, and that's plastered all over the place wherever and it actually inspired the intro to Anka. That was not originally planned.
Neat. Okay.
Yeah, that's like all him. He just like, in his multiple playthroughs and experimentations, he just played those 4 chords. Wow. And I thought, I was like, all right, that's the intro. That's awesome. And so then I wrote the horn intro after the fact, after I sort of built that into the track.
In 11, by the way.
Again, great ear, Emily.
I mean, I wasn't sure if it was 6 and 5 or if you're thinking of it in 11. I always divide it personally, but yeah.
I think when we played that song live, everyone kind of had their own way of feeling it. So
sure.
Yeah. I play. I think there's a lot of accordion on that, and there's electric bass. I'm playing a drum set, which I'm not a drummer, but I love playing drums. Like it's kind of like most people when they pick up rock band drums, they're just like, oh, this is the best one to play. That's how I feel about the literal drum set, and I know I'm not good at it, but I try anyway.
Nice.
And then I play a little flute, but my wife is like an all-star classical flute player, so I literally have her playing on every soundtrack that I do.
Okay.
So she's playing most of the flute, but I'm playing some flute. I play a little violin. Again, I'm not a violinist. We have a real violinist covering the real parts. Liz Estes, Mm-hmm. So I'm sure there's other instruments in there, but but my main bag of tricks is woodwinds. So if you're gonna hire me for a soundtrack, you're probably going to get some saxophone. I'm sorry.
Well, and saxophonists are well known as being known to double on instruments. I mean, if you go to college as a saxophonist, it's pretty likely you're going to have to also study clarinet and flute. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's not the case with other woodwind players. So did you learn those instruments? And you said you let your wife play the flute, but did you mostly learn clarinet and stuff when you were in college and you've just held on to that love and played it that way?
Yeah, definitely. It was one of those awesome things about the University of Miami specifically, where they really cared about that and they wanted everyone to be a functionally doubling woodwind player, so that you can, a lot of the gigs at that time, at least in Miami, were musicals and shows, those kinds of things, like live pit orchestra positions. Yeah. So they definitely made a case for all the saxophone students to learn those instruments. And then I met Amy. And I kind of stopped playing the flute because I'm
Your
like,
wife.
My wife. So I'm like, she's an incredible, like I said before, an incredible flute player. And I'm like, well, I don't have to figure out the flute anymore. She's got it covered. So, but she doesn't like to, like, there are some flute sounds or flute like aesthetics that are more ambient or more folksy or jazzy, what have you, that she just doesn't feel comfortable. She doesn't like playing out of tune. Okay. And so, she just won't. So it's like, okay, like if there's ever a song where I'm playing flute, I have to make sure and say that it wasn't her. That don't worry, that's me. It's all good. Like
that's amazing.
And she makes fun of me all the time. But I love playing clarinet. I wouldn't say I'm an amazing, by any stretch of the imagination, clarinet player, but I love it and I try. And I just think that the natural timbre of the clarinet in and of itself has so much character that it's still, I think, like a secret weapon instrument that people don't really know about.
I think so too. I think Mozart was onto something there, and really, because there's just something special about it's such a warm sound. I mean, for all the beauty and perfection that is the cello, it's still it doesn't have the breath that the clarinet does, and I think that's the big difference for me. I always say if I were to go back, I'd play clarinet, but I probably actually would choose bassoon just for scholarships. But yeah,
that's what my son wants to play. My son
bassoon
is
8. Or clarinet.
He wants to. He's learning clarinet now because he can't have a bassoon because he's 8.
There you go.
Yeah, but he loves like the Sorcerer's Apprentice and the Rite of Spring, and
Hilarious.
he's been watching Fantasia, right? So he's like, what instrument is that? And I'm like, that's a bassoon. He's like, I'm gonna play the bassoon.
All right, that's good.
Okay, yeah, but no, it's an amazing instrument. Another backseat or whatever you call it, like a underdog instrument. Yeah. That deserves more credit.
Very much.
It's awesome.
Totally, I love it. Oh my God, that's so amazing. Like, I loved Anka. That's how it said, Anka, track 3.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, loved that cut so much because of the mixed meter, and I loved that I was pretty sure that was you playing trumpet. I thought that was really sweet. But But that was one of my favorite ones, and that's the one that gets stuck in my head like that. It's in my head right now. So I'd just kind of love to hear about some of your favorites, and if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Anka is up there for that was actually when I wrote that one. That was the song that made me want to start a band and play this music live.
Nice.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, this song is so fun. It's got a bass line. Like the bass line of that one is kind of catchy in and of itself.
Yes.
But it's a relatively simple melody and chord. It doesn't even like have a chord progression. It's just a vamp.
Yeah.
And I'm like a harmony nut. So like at least jazz harmony. And so I was like, why am I settling for this one? And I just think it's like it was complete. Like it just had a melody and that's all it needed. It's a vamp and that's great. The city in and of itself kind of lends itself to that like industrial. It's kind of a big city. I think of it like Chicago, and the history of Chicago, where it's just like it's a functional big city with a lot going on, and you don't know about none of it. It's all happening in the background, and you can go to Water Tower Place, but like what's happening in that building, who knows? Sorry, I grew up there, and that was how I felt about it. But
nice.
So yeah, it features that contemporary jazz ensemble already. Kind of like that was how I arranged it. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna get Mike Baggetta on this, and he laid down that solo in the middle of it, and then the intro as well, where I layered that at the front of it and added some saxophones. I was like, we should play this live. We got to play this. This is going to be so fun. And so I didn't get to play. I purposefully, because saxophone solos in game soundtracks are a no-no, in my humble opinion. Sorry, Mario Kart. That alto solo is ridiculous. Give me a freaking break. Sorry. But I know better, right? Okay, so there's no saxophone solo, but there is a ripping guitar solo by Mike. So as far as some of the other ones go, Clifton, I think you'll appreciate this, was inspired by Bon Iver.
Oh, neat. Okay.
It's kind of got that like I wouldn't call it a shuffle feel.
Yeah.
With like folksy up tempo and kind of a moving, interesting chord progression and a melody that's moving as well in the orchestra and flutes. Mm-hmm. So it's driving, but the backstory of the town is that it's kind of a windy city, again, Chicago, whatever.
Yeah.
but very kind of friendly and a lot of life. So I didn't want it to feel too heavy, but it's still filled with an orchestra. It's like one of the only songs that has a fully treated kind of string section and woodwind section, like kind of playing as an ensemble. Aldhurst is another one that seems to get a lot of just favorite track from a lot of people on Twitter. At least it was featured in the trailer, the most recent one. It's a kind of a straightforward jam, but it's like a straightforward African influenced kind of jam. It's in 4/4. Sorry, it's not in 11. I apologize. But like the backstory for that town was that they have these, kind of like it's like a party town. Like every night there's a band playing and there's dances and there's like a festival happening nonstop. so having a very straightforward jam band African kind of influenced song for Aldhurst made a lot of sense, except for this middle section where it's kind of a breakdown, which hints that Aldhurst has had like a troubled history, right?
Sure.
So like there's this middle section where it kind of hints at that with arpeggiated synths, and it kind of gets dark. There's a electric guitar melody that's kind of somber. But then it picks it right back up into more solos, and I just gave in a little bit. Like, this has to have like a jam band section. So
Nice.
It features Liz Estes playing an awesome violin solo. I'm trying my hardest to follow her with a mandolin solo, and I think I'm playing some flute, but it's a fun one. Yeah. I think Hara is maybe one of the few that kind of go a little bit outside as far as where I'm pulling references from. The town in of itself is super sad, like it's kind of a tragic story. Okay. So I wanted it to feel like immediately that you feel that. Mm-hmm. So there's this awesome duo record by two Norwegian jazz musicians. I'm going to pronounce these wrong. I'm sorry. Oscar Gudjonsen and Skuli Sverrisson.
Okay.
I don't know if you know those guys, but they're some of the more well-known jazz musicians there. But the Norwegian aesthetic, something about the way that they interpret melodies. They have two duo albums. One was like in the early 2000s, and one came out like I want to say 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah,
and they're both equally gorgeous, and they're melodic, and they're warm, and they're quiet, and they stay there. Like it's these folk albums from two incredible jazz musicians where they don't go above mezzo piano.
Wow.
And yeah, it's filled with reverb. It's like for anyone that's like a production nut, it's like it's a breath of fresh air. Cool. So that was definitely the influence here, where the melody is super simple. It's just like bass and guitar for the first half of it, and very kind of like an obviously sad, reflective melody. There's one more that probably is my favorite song, so I'd be remiss to talk about it, which is Tosende Canals, the last song on the soundtrack. When I read the story brief on that location, it just seemed to be like super interesting. Like it's a deserted farmland that lives outside of the city, where they rely on broken technology to run their farms. And I was like, whoa, I'm in. So some people don't even get there to this location because it's kind of far out.
Yeah.
But it's filled. I think I put more effort into the production of this song than any of the others, because I've loved the brief of the location. So there's a lot of there's a percussion kit that I built from sounds around my house. It's got more synthesizers than some of the other tracks, which hint at the technology involved. It's got Mike playing these incredible effects throughout the entire thing. I think I just like left it on, so it's on for the whole song. Strings, clarinet, melodies. There's some indie Fender guitar arpeggios, which is a very clear Beach House knockoff. Sorry, guys, blatantly. But yeah, then it like that kind of ends the soundtrack. I felt like that was kind of appropriate, like something where, the last track of the soundtrack is this location where you'll probably never go to it. Yeah. But it's got a lot of color and character. So if you happen to like make it there, you're in for a treat in the game. And if you happen to listen through all of the soundtrack and get there, it's like another, it's a treat. So either way. I'm appreciative of any developer that comes to me with, asking for music. So I definitely don't mean to lessen those experiences. But working with these guys and with, it honestly felt like they let me make a record that I wanted to make anyway. Like if I didn't have a title or a, if there was no game that this music needed to be paired to, this is music that I've kind of been hoping to make for a long time. So to get to make that and get paid for it, and for it to be released alongside people that believe in it, I'm just so thrilled that they asked me and that they let it happen the way it happened. And also their input on the music, which ran throughout the whole thing, it was a collaboration in that way by all accounts. Was helpful, like super helpful and inspiring me to do, kind of reach outside my comfort zone instrumentationally and from a songwriting perspective, and not to mention they're just Diala and Zach and Holly, the three primary Echo Dog developers are just the nicest, most wonderful people you'll ever meet, and inspired to make really cool stuff, which is, this is their debut game.
Oh, cool.
So I hope they get to make a bunch more. And, I hope that this game does well enough to support them.
Well, Steve, like I said, I really, really just loved listening to it, and I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk about it. I've been looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
Well, it means so much that you take the time, Emily. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to episode 142 of Level with Emily Reese. You can learn more about Steve Pardo at patreon.com/level. I'm Emily Reese. Sam Keenan is our producer. Say hi, Sam.
Yeah.
You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Level with Emily and learn more about us at levelwithemily.com, made possible by Adam Selvage at Tiki Web Services and composer Brad Gentle.